why her summons is disregarded. Consider well who you do tie yourself to, Master Coffin, Teslin said, still looking only at him. Wrong choices can lead to an unpleasant future, even for a Tabiran. Consider when. Then she let go. As he followed Laren, he did not allow himself to show his eagerness to be away, but he did wish the woman would walk a little faster. She glided along ahead of him, regal as any queen, regal as any Aes Sedai. When they reached the first turning, he looked over his shoulder. The 5 Aes Sedai were still standing there, staring after him. As if his look had been a signal, they exchanged silent glances and went, each in a different direction. Adeleus came toward him, but a dozen steps before reaching him, she smiled at him again and disappeared through a doorway. Deep currents. He preferred swimming where his feet could touch the bottom of the pond. Laren was waiting around the corner, hands on broad hips and her face much too smooth. Beneath her skirts, he suspected her foot was tapping impatiently. He gave her his most winning smile. Giggling girls or gray-haired grandmothers, women softened for that one. It had won him kisses and eased him out of predicaments more often than he could count. It was almost as good as flowers. That was neatly done, and I thank you. I'm sure the Queen doesn't really want to see me. If she did, he did not want to see her. Everything he thought about nobles was tripled for royalty. Nothing he had found in those old memories changed that. Some of those fellows had spent considerable time around kings and queens and the like. Now, if you will just show me where Nynaeve and Elaine stay. Strangely, the smile did not seem to have any effect. I would not lie, Lord Harvard. It would be more than my ears are worth. The Queen is...
Hey, OG, how you doing, bro?
You are a very brave man, she added.
I'll be on in just a second. I'm just throwing Red Grub real quick.
You're a very great fool.
But definitely appreciate you stopping by, OG.
A choice between going to see the Queen and wandering miles of corridor until he stumbled on somebody who would tell him what he wanted to know. He went to see the Queen. Tylin Quintara, by the grace of the light, Queen of Altara, Mistress of the Four Winds, Guardian of the Sea of Storms, High Seat of House Mitsubar, awaited him in a room with yellow walls and a pale blue ceiling, standing before a huge white fireplace with a stone lintel carved into a stormy sea. She was well worth seeing, he decided.
Hell yeah.
Tylin was not young. The shiny
well, I'm not doing too
cascading
bad,
floors
OG.
had gray at the temples and faint lines filled the corners of her
But
eyes.
after I'm done, we'll
Nor was she exactly pretty, though the
load the bowl
stars on her cheeks had nearly vanished with age.
roll the bowl and do a dab.
Handsome came closer.
How you been doing, OG?
But she was imposing. Large dark eyes regarded him majestically, an eagle's eyes. She had little real power. A man could ride beyond her rid in 2 or 3 days and still have a lot of Altara ahead. But he thought she might even make an Aes Sedai step back. Like Isabella of Dal Kalain, who had made the Amelin Angara come to her. That was one of the old memories. Dal Kalain had vanished in the Trolloc Wars.
Hell yeah, I'm
He
packing.
said, sweeping his hat
Yeah,
wide
that always
around
takes a
for his
while.
imaginary cloak. By your summons do I come. Imposing or not, it was hard to keep his eyes away from the small lace-trimmed oval where her white sheets of marriage night hung. A very nicely rounded sight indeed. Yet the more bosom a woman displayed, the less she wanted you to look. Openly, at least. White sheets. But he already knew she was a widow. Not that it mattered. He would as soon tangle himself with that fox-faced dark friend as with the Queen. Not looking at all was difficult, but he managed. Most likely she would call guards rather than draw the gem-encrusted dagger thrust behind a woven gold belt to match the collar her marriage night hung from her. Maybe that was why the dice were still rolling in his head. The possibility of an encounter with the headsman would set them spinning if anything did. Layered silk petticoats rippled white and yellow as she crossed the room and walked slowly all the way around him. You speak the old tongue, she said, once she stood in front of him again. Her voice was low-pitched and musical. Without waiting for a reply, she glided to a chair and sat, adjusting her green the skirts. An unconscious gesture. Her gaze remained fixed on him. He thought she could probably tell when his small clothes had been washed last. You wish to leave a message? I have what is necessary. A lace fall at her wrist swayed as she gestured to a small writing table standing beneath a gilt-framed mirror. All the furnishings were gilded and carved like bamboo. Tall, triple-arched windows opening onto a wrought iron balcony admitted a sea breeze that was surprisingly pleasant, if not exactly cool. Yet Mac felt hotter than in the street. It had nothing to do with
Hell yeah.
De Yenei, you mente funciona, yet. That was what he had said. A bloody old tongue popping out of his mouth again, without him knowing it. He had thought he had that little bother under control. Until none of those bloody dice would stop, but for what? Best to keep his eyes to himself and his mouth shut as much as possible. I thank you, Majesty. You made very sure.
Hell yeah.
Thick sheets of pale paper already waited on the slanted table at a comfortable height for writing. He propped his hat against the table leg. He could see her in the mirror, watching. Why had he let his tongue loose? Dipping a golden pen, what else would it have? He composed what he wanted to write in his head before bending over the paper with an arm curled around it. His hand was awkward and square, as no love of writing. I followed a dark friend to the palace Jake and Karen was renting. She tried to kill me once, maybe ran as well. She was greeted like an old friend of the house. For a moment, he studied that, writing the end of the pen before realizing he was flooring himself cold. They needed to know. He added a few more reasonably political things. Be sensible. If you have to go traipsing around, let me send a few men along to keep you from having your head spoiled. Anyway, isn't it about time I took you back to Egwene? There's nothing here but heat and flies, and we can find plenty of those in Camelot. There. I could not ask for pleasanter than that. Blotting the page carefully, he folded it 4 times.
You know, that's usually how most packing is. Work on one box and switch to another box.
He puffed on it till it glowed, then used it to light a candle and picked up the stick of red wax. As the sealing wax dripped onto the edges of the paper, it suddenly struck him that he had a signet ring in his pocket. Just something the ringmaker had carved to show his skill, better than a plain lock. The ring was slightly longer than the pool of solidifying wax, yet most of the sigil was on. For the first time, he got a good look at what he had bought. Inside a border of large crescents, a running fox seemed to have startled 2 birds with a flight. In green. Too bad it was not a hand. For the band. But appropriate enough. He certainly needed to be crafty as a fox to keep up with Nynaeve and Elaine. And if they were not exactly flighty, well... Besides, the medallion had made him fond of foxes. He scrawled Nynaeve's name on the outside, and then Elaine's, as an afterthought. One or the other, they should see it soon. Turning with the sealed letter held in front of him, he gave a start as his knuckles brushed against the tile in his bosom. He stumbled back against the writing table, staring and trying not to turn red. Staring at her face. Just her face. He had not heard her approach. Best to simply ignore the brushing, not embarrass her.
I'll be right back.
She probably thought it was as clumsy loud as it was.
Hell yeah, OG.
There is
You have a good sleep, bro.
No, Majesty. Insufficient room remained between them to lift the ladder.
I'm about to go throw this bowl in the kitchen real quick, and I'll be right back.
And I don't mean arresting you. You are so. Of course you are. No one would make that chart without beads. A furrow creased her brow, but she gave her head a shake, and the frown disappeared. Let us speak of pleasant things. He could have yelled. He told her the White Cloak ambassador to her court was a dark friend, and all she did was grimace. You are Lord Matt. There was just a hint of question in the title. Her eyes minded him more than ever of an eagle's. A queen could not like someone coming to her pretending to be a lord. Just Matt Coffin. Something told him she would hear a lie. Besides, letting people think he was a lord was just a ruse, one he would rather have managed without. In Ebludar, you could find a duel anytime you turned around, but few challenged lords except other lords. As it was, in the last month he had cracked a number of heads, bloodied 4 men, and run half a mile to escape a woman. Highlands stare made him nervous, and those dice still rattled about in his skull. He wanted out of here. If you'll tell me where to leave the land, the daughter heir and my niece should I say, she said. But one knows to hear what is not said. Casually, she reached up and touched his cheek. He half raised his own hand uncertainly. Had he spoken it there, chewing the pen? Women did like the tiny things, including men. Some men did too.
Yeah, OG.
What they do not say here is that you are an tame room, a gambler and chaser after women. Her eyes held his, expression never altering the hair, and her voice stayed firm and cool. As she spoke, her fingers struck his other cheek. Untamed men are often the most interesting. Victor told. Finger up on his lips. An untamed rogue travels with Aes Sedai. But to hear him, I think, makes them uneasy. It takes a man with a strong liver to make Aes Sedai. How will you bring the power down? Her hand settled against his neck. Feel his pulse throbbing against his hands.
Time to load the boat.
The writing table behind his back rattled against the wall as he tried to back away. The only way out was to push her aside or climb over her skirts. Women did not behave this way. Well, some of his old memories suggested they did, but it was mainly memories of memories, that woman had done this, or this woman had done that. The things he recalled clearly were battles for the most part. No help here at all. She smiled, a faint curl on her lips that did not lessen the predatory gleam in her eyes. The hair on his head tried to stand up. Her eyes flickered over his shoulder to the mirror, and she turned quickly, gaping at her back as she moved away. I must arrange to speak with you again, Mr. Coffin. She cut off as the door swung all the way open, apparently surprised, but then he realized she had seen him begin to lean in. A slender young man entered, limping slightly, a dark lad with sharp eyes that flicked by Matt but barely paused. Black hair hung to his shoulders.
Stood dad real quick.
Normally draped across his shoulders, green silk, the gold chain across his chest, and gold letters worked in the lapels. Mother, he said, bowing to Tyler. Fair slender. She filled the name with warmth and kissed him on both cheeks and his eyes. The firm, even icy tone she had used with Matt might have been thin. It went well, I see. Not as well as it might. The boy sighed. Despite his eyes, he had a mouth. The soft voice. Never nicked my leg on the second pass. Then slipped on the third, so I ran him through the heart instead of the soul. The offense was not to kill him, and now I must pay condolences to his widow. I regret that. It was never dead. Just be sure your visit is brief.
Hey, Diamond Fox, how you doing? I'm not doing too bad. About to take a dab.
This is Master Matt Coughlin, my son. He is to be. I hope you'll make a friend of him. Perhaps you two will go to the Swarbar night dances together. Back jump. The last thing he wanted to do
How you doing, Diamond Fox?
2 all-day affairs, not just a simple evening feast. I do my dancing in taverns. The rougher sort, I'm afraid. After that, it was all downhill on crumbling shingle. Before Matt knew what was happening, Tylen had him sewed up in a sack. He and Veslin would be attending the festivals together. All of the festivals. Veslin called
Oh, that was a good hit.
and hunting for girls without thinking. Would never have said that in front of somebody's mother had he thought. The boy laughed and said, "A girl or a fight, pouting lips or a flashing blade. Whichever dance you're dancing at the moment is always the most fun. Wouldn't you say so?" Tylen smiled at Veslin. Matt managed a weak laugh. This Veslin was mad. Him and his mother both. Chapter 17. The Triumph of Logic. Matt stalked the let go. If he would do any good, he would have run. The skin between his shoulder blades prickled so he almost forgot the dice dancing in his head. The worst moment, the very worst of a dozen bad, had been when Veslin teased his mother, saying she should find herself pretty for the balls. Tylen laughingly claimed the queen had no time for young men, all the while looking at Matt with those bloody eagle's eyes. Now he knew why rabbits ran so fast. He stumped across Mulhara Square, not seeing anything. Had Nynaeve and Elaine been completely caught in Elida, in the fountain beneath that statue of some long-dead queen, 2 spans or more tall and pointing to the sea, he would have passed by without a second look. The common room of the Wandering Woman was dim and comparatively cool after the bright heat outside. He took off his hat gratefully. A faint haze of pipe smoke hung in the air. The arabesque carved shutters across the wide-arched windows let in more than enough light. Some bedraggled pine branches had been tied above the windows for a Swovan night. In one corner, 2 women with flutes and a fellow with a small drum between his knees provided a shrill, pulsing sort of music that Matt had come to like. Even at this time of the day, there were a few patrons, upland merchants in moderately plain woolens, with a sprinkling of ebudari, most in the vests of various guilds. No apprentices or even journeymen here. So close to the palace, the Wandering Woman was hardly an inexpensive place to drink or eat, much less sleep. The rattle of dice at a table in the corner echoed the field, but he turned the other way, to where 3 of his men sat on benches around another table. Koravin, a thickly muscled Karianan with a nose that made his eyes seem even smaller than they were, sat stripped to the waist, holding his tattooed arms over his head, while Bannon wound strips of bandage around his middle. Bannon was 3 times Koravin's size, but he looked like a balding sack of suet overflowing his bench. His coat appeared to have been slept in for a week. It always did, even an hour after one of the serving women ironed it. Some of the merchants eyed the 3 uneasily, but none of the ebudari. Men or women, they had seen the same or worse, often. Harnan, a lantern-jawed tire and file leader with a crude tattoo of a hawk on his left cheek, was berating Koravin. "Don't care what the flaming fish seller said, you goat-spawned toad. You use your bloody club and don't go accepting flaming challenges just because." He cut off when he saw Matt and tried to look as if he had not been saying what he had. He just looked as if he had a toothache. If Matt asked, it would turn out Koravin had slipped and fallen on his own dagger or some such foolery Matt was supposed to pretend to believe. So he just leaned his fists on the table as if he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Truth to tell, it was not that out of the ordinary. Bannon was the only man who had not been in 2 dozen scrapes already. For some reason, looking for trouble walked as wide of Bannon as they did in Elysium. The only difference was that Bannon seemed to like it that way. "Has Tom or Julian been here yet?" Bannon did not look up from tying the bandages. "Haven't seen hide, hair, and a toenail. Elysian was in for a bit, though." There was no milord nonsense from Bannon. He made no bones about not liking nobles, with the unfortunate exception of Elaine. "Left an iron-strapped chest up in your room and went out blabbing about trinkets." He made as if to spit through the gap in his teeth and glanced at one of the serving women and did not. Mistress Annan was deaf on anybody spitting on her floors, or tossing bones, or even tapping out a pipe. The boy's out back in the stable, he went on before Matt could ask, with his book and one of the innkeeper's daughters. Another of the girls spanked his bottom for pinching hers. Finishing the last knot, he gave Matt an accusatory look, as if it had been his fault in some way. Poor little mite, Corbin muttered, twisting to see whether the bandages would stay in place. He had a leopard and a boar inked on one arm, a lion and a woman on the other. The woman did not seem to be wearing much except her hair. Sniveling he was, though he did brighten when Larol let him hold her hand. The men all looked after Oliver like a gaggle of uncles, though certainly the sort no mother would want for her son. He'll live. The boy was probably picking up these habits from his uncles. Next, they would give him a tattoo. At least Oliver had not sneaked out to run with the street children. He seemed to enjoy that almost as much as he did making himself a nuisance to grown women. Arden, you wait here. And if you see Tom or Julian, collar them. Bannon, I want you to see what you can learn around the Chosing Palace, over near the Three Towers gate. Hesitating, he looked over the room. Serving women drifted in and out of the kitchens with food and, more often, drink. Most of the patrons seemed intent on the silver cups, though a pair of women in weavers' vests argued quietly, ignoring their wine punch, leaning across the table at one another. Some of the merchants appeared to be haggling, waving hands and dipping fingers in their drinks to scribble numbers on the table. The music should mask his words for eavesdroppers, but he lowered his voice anyway. News that Jacob Carradine had dark friends coming to call screwed Bannon's round face into a scowl, as if he might spit no matter who saw. Arnon muttered something about filthy white cloaks, and Coravin suggested denouncing Carradine to the civil guard. That got such disgusted looks from the other two that he buried his face in a cup of ale. He was one of the few men Matt knew who could drink Ebudari ale in this heat, or drink it at all, for that matter. Be careful, Matt warned when Bannon stood. It was not that he was worried, really. Bannon moved with surprising lightness for such a fat man. He was the best horse thief in 2 countries at the least, and could slip by even a warder unseen. But they're a nasty lot. White cloaks or dark friends, either one. The man only grunted and motioned for Coravin to gather his shirt and coat and come along. My lord, Arnon said as they left. My lord, I heard there was a fog in the Rahat yesterday.
Sorry I'm distracted, everyone. I'm
Arnon looked worried.
playing a game too.
Much worried him. What do you mean, a fog? This heat, fog thick as porridge, would not last a heartbeat. The file eater shrugged uncomfortably and peered into his mug. A fog. I heard there was things in it. He looked up at Matt. I heard people just disappeared. Parts of them. Matt managed not to shiver. The fog's gone, isn't it? You weren't in it. Worry when you are. That's all you can do. Arnon frowned doubtfully, but that was the pure truth. These bubbles of evil, that was what Randall called them, or Lorraine had, burst where and when they chose, and there did not seem to be anything even Rand could do to stop them. Worrying about it did as much good as worrying about whether a roof tile would fall on your head in the street tomorrow. Less, since you could decide to stay in.
Did not hit before I get to that part.
There was something that was worth worrying about, though. Nolisian had left their winnings sitting upstairs. Bloody nobles tossed gold around like water. Leaving Arnon studying his mug, I headed for the railless stairs at the back of the room.
Hey, Gardner, how you doing, bro?
One of the serving
Hope you're doing well.
Kyra was a slender, full-lipped girl with smoky eyes.
I'm just chilling, smoking, and doing a little gaming.
Said, twisting her skirts from side to side and looking up at him through long passions. There was a certain smokiness in her voice, too. Said he was an illuminator, but he looked seedy to me. He ordered a meal and left when Mistress Annan wouldn't give it. He wanted you to pay. Next time, Pigeon, give the meal, he told her, slipping a silver mark into the plunging neck of her dress. I'll speak to Mistress Anna. He did want to find an illuminator, a real one, not some fellow selling
yeah.
of sawdust. But it hardly mattered now. Not with the gold lying unguarded. With fogs in the Rahad and dark friends and Aes Sedai and bloody Thailand taking leave of her senses, and Kyra giggled and twisted like a stroked cat. Would you like me to bring some punch to your room, my lord? Or anything? She smiled hopefully, invitingly. Maybe later, he said, tapping her nose with a fingertip. She giggled again. She always did.
Let's see.
Kyra would have her skirts sewn.
Looks like he's turning around.
The innkeeper looked after her serving women almost as closely as she did her daughters. Almost. Maybe later. Trotting up the white stone stairs, he put Kyra out of his mind. What was he to do about all that? The boy would find himself in real trouble one day if he thought he could treat women that way. He was going to have to keep him away from Harnan and the others as well.
Yeah, Garner. Definitely appreciate it, brother.
They were a bad influence on the boy. Have this on top of everything else. He had to get Nynaeve and Elaine out of Ebou Dar before something worse went wrong. His room was at the front, with windows overlooking the square. As he reached for the door, the hallway floor behind him squeaked. In 100 inns, it would not even have registered. But the floors in the Wandering Woman did not squeak. He looked back and spun just in time to drop his hat and catch the descending truncheon with his left hand instead of his skull. The blow stung his hand to numbness, but he held on desperately as thick fingers dug into his throat, forcing him back against the door to his room. His head hit with a thump. Silver-rimmed black spots danced in his vision, obscuring his sweating face. All he could really see was a big nose and yellow teeth, and those seemed hazy. Suddenly he realized he was on the far edge of consciousness. Those fingers were closing off blood to his brain along with air. His
You take care too.
bumbling over the
That
hills.
most hated
His fingers no longer remembered what they were for.
he's in his room for the night.
Free. He could see it rising.
Yeah, you get up for work
Rising to
tomorrow.
smash his skull. Focusing everything, he jerked the knife from its scabbard and thrust. His attacker let out a high-pitched scream. Matt was vaguely aware of the club bouncing off his shoulder as it fell to the floor, but the man did not let go of his throat. Stumbling, Matt drove him back, tearing at the clutching fingers with one hand, driving his knife repeatedly with the other. Abruptly, the fellow fell, sliding from Matt's blade. The knife nearly followed him to the floor. So did Matt. Gulping breath, sweet air, he clung to something, a doorway, to hold himself on his feet. From the floor, a plain-faced man stared up at him with eyes that would never see anything again. A heavy-set fellow with curled Mirandian mustaches, a dark blue coat, fit for a small merchant or a prosperous shopkeeper. Not the look of a thief about him at all. Abruptly, he realized they had stumbled through an open door in their fight. It was a smaller room than Matt's, windowless, a pair of oil lamps on small tables beside the narrow bed providing a murky illumination. A lanky, pale-haired man straightened from a long open chest, staring oddly at the corpse. The chest took up most of the free space in the room. Matt opened his mouth to apologize for intruding so roughly. The lanky man snatched a long dagger from his belt, a cudgel from the bed, and leaped over the chest at him. That had not been the look you give a dead stranger. Clinging unsteadily to the door frame, Matt threw underhanded, the hilt no sooner leaving his hand than he was scrabbling under his coat for another. His knife struck squarely in the other man's throat, and Matt almost fell again, this time from relief. As the man clutched himself, blood spurting between his fingers, toppled backward into the open chest. It's good to be lucky, Matt croaked. Staggering, he retrieved his knife, wiping it clean on the fellow's gray coat. A better coat than the other, still wool, but of a better cut. A lesser lord would not have been ashamed to wear it. Andred by the collar. He sank onto the bed, frowning at the man sprawled in the chest. A noise made him look up. His manservant was in the doorway, trying unsuccessfully to hide a large black iron frying pan behind his back. Nerem kept a full set of pots and everything else he thought a lord's servant might need traveling in the small room he shared with Alber next to Matt's. He was short, even for a Carianan, and skinny to boot. "My lord has blood on his coat again, I fear," he murmured in melancholy tones. The day he scented anything else, the sun would rise in the west. "I do wish my lord would be more careful of his clothes. It is so hard to remove blood without a stain, and the insects hardly need any encouragement to eat holes. This place has more insects than I have ever seen, my lord." No mention at all of 2 dead men, or what he had intended with the frying pan. That scream had drawn other attention. The wandering woman was not the sort of inn where screams passed unremarked. Feet pounded in the hallway, and Mistress Annan pushed Nerem firmly out of her way and raised her skirts to step around the corpse on the floor. Her husband followed her in, a square-faced, gray-haired man with the double earring of the ancient and honorable League of the Nets dangling from his left ear. The 2 white stones in the lower hoop said he owned other boats beside the one he captained. Jasper Annan was part of the reason Matt was careful not to smile too much at any of Mistress Annan's daughters. The man wore a work knife stuffed behind his belt, and a longer curved blade, too. And his long blue and green vest revealed arms and chest crisscrossed with dueling scars. He was alive, though, and most of the men who had given those scars were not. The other reason for caution was Sitala Annan herself. Matt had never before let himself be turned off the girl because of her mother, even if that mother owned the inn where he was staying. But Mistress Annan had a way about her. Large gold hoops in her ears swung as she surveyed the dead men without a flinch. She was pretty, despite a touch of gray in her hair, and her marriage knife nestled in roundness that normally would have drawn his eyes like moths to a candle. Yet looking at her that way would have been like looking at... not his mother. And an Aes Sedai, maybe, though he had done that, of course, just to look. Or at Queen Tylan. I might help him there. Putting a finger on why was not easy. She simply had a way about her. It was just difficult to think of doing anything that would offend Sitala Annan. "One of them jumped me in the hall." Matt kicked the chest lightly. It made a hollow sound despite the dead man slumped inside with his arms and legs dangling out. "This is empty, except for him. I think they meant to fill it with whatever they could steal. The gold, perhaps. Unlikely they could have heard of that, one only hours ago, but he would ask Mistress Annan about a safer place to keep it." She nodded calmly, hazel eyes serene. Men knifed in her inn did not ruffle her feathers. "They insisted on carrying it up themselves. They're stuck," so they claimed. "They took the room just before you came in. For a few hours, they said, to sleep before traveling on toward Norchasen." That was a small village on the coast to the east, but it was unlikely they would have told the truth. Her tone implied as much. She frowned at the dead men as though wishing she could shake them alive to answer questions. "They were picky about their room, though. The pale-haired man was in charge. He turned down the first 3 he was offered, then accepted this that was meant for a single servant. I thought he was being stingy with a coin." "Even a thief can be tight-fisted," Matt said absently. This could have qualified to start those dice rolling in his head. A head that would have been cracked open for sure without the luck of that fellow stepping on the one board in the whole inn that would squeak. But the bloody things were still tumbling. He did not like it. "You think it was chance, then, my lord?" "What else?" She had no answer, but she frowned at the corpses again. Maybe she was not so sanguine as he had thought. She was not native to Eludar, after all. "Too many roughs in the city of late." Jasper had a deep voice, and speaking normally, he seemed to be barking commands on a fishing boat. "Maybe you ought to think on hiring guards." All Mistress Annan did was lift an eyebrow at her husband. but his hands rose defensively. Peace be on you, wife. I spoke without thinking. Abudari women were known to express displeasure with a husband in a sharp fashion. It was not beyond possibility that a few of his scars came from her. That marriage knife had several uses. Thanking the light he was not married to an Abudari, Matt replaced his own knife in its sheath alongside the others. Thank the light he was not married at all. His fingers brushed paper. Mistress Hanan was not letting her husband off easily. You frequently do, husband, she said, fingering the hilt between her breasts. Many women would not let it pass. Belinda always tells me I am not firm enough when you speak out of line. I need to provide a good example for my daughters. Acerbity melted into a smile, if a small one. Consider yourself chastised. I will refrain from telling you who should haul which net on which boat. You are too kind to me, wife, replied dryly. There was no guild for innkeepers in Ebudar, but every inn in the city was in the hands of a woman. Ebudari, bad luck of the worst sort, would dog any inn owned by a man, or any vessel owned by a woman. There were no women in the Fisherman's Guild. Matt pulled out the paper. It was snowy white, expensive, and stiff, and folded small. The few lines on it were printed in square letters, like those Halter might use, or an adult who did not want the hand recognized. Elaine and Nynaeve are pushing too far. Remind them they are still in danger from the tower. Warn them to be careful, or they will be kneeling to ask Elida's pardon yet. That was all. No signature. Still in danger? That suggested it was nothing new, and somehow it did not fit with them being snared up by the rebels. No, that was the wrong question. Who had slipped in this note? Obviously somebody who thought they could not simply hand it to him. Who had had the opportunity since he put the coat on this morning? It had not been there then, for sure. Somebody close. Somebody unbidden who found himself humming a snatch of "She dazzles my eyes and clouds my mind." Around here, the tune had different words. They called it Upside Down and Round and Round. Only Teslin or Jolene fit, and that was impossible. Bad news, my lord, Mistress Hanan asked. Matt stuffed the note into his pocket. Does any man ever get to understand women? I don't mean just Aes Sedai. Any women. Jasper roared, and when his wife directed a meaning gaze his way, he only laughed harder. The look she gave Matt would have shamed an Aes Sedai for its perfect serenity. Men have it quite easy, my lord, if they only looked or listened. Women have the difficult task. We must try to understand men. Jasper took hold of the doorframe, tears rolling down his dark face. She eyed him sideways, tilting her head, then turned, all cool calmness, and punched him under the ribs with her fist so hard that his knees buckled. His laughter took on a wheeze without stopping. There is a saying in Ebudar, my lord, she said to Matt over her shoulder. A man is a maze of brambles and darkness, and even he does not know the way. Matt snorted. Fat lot of help she was. Well, Teslin or Jolene or somebody else. Must have been somebody else. If you could only think who. The White Tower was a long way away. The Taken Guardian was right here. Found two corpses. And so were 100 other scoundrels. Somehow, he would see those two women safely out of Ebudar. The trouble was, he did not have a clue how. He wished those bloody dice would stop and be done with it.
The apartments Jolene shared with Teslin were quite spacious, including a bedchamber for each of them, plus one apiece for their maids, and another that would have done quite well for Blarick and Fen, if Teslin could have stood to have her warders with them. The woman saw every man as a potentially rabid wolf, and there was no gainsaying her when she truly wanted something. As inexorable as Elida, she ground down whatever lay in her path. They stood as equals in every real way, certainly, but not many managed to prevail over Teslin without a clear advantage. She was at the writing table in the sitting room when Jolene entered, her pen making an awful scritch. She was always parsimonious with the ink. Without a word, Jolene swept by her and out onto the balcony, a long cage of white-painted iron. The scroll work was so tight that the men working in the garden 3 stories below would have a difficult time seeing that there was anyone within. Flowers in this region ordinarily thrived in heat, wild colors to outshine the interior of the palace, but nothing bloomed down there. Gardeners moved along the gravel walks with buckets of water, yet nearly every leaf was yellow or brown. She would not have admitted it under torture, but the heat made her afraid. The garden was watching the world, and their only hope a boy who was running wild. "Bread and water?" Teslin said suddenly. "Send the Cawthon boy off to the tower? If there do be changes in what we did plan, you will please inform me before telling others." Jolene felt a touch of heat in her cheeks. "Marillilla needed to be set down. She lectured when I was a novice. So had Teslin, a severe teacher who held her classes with an iron grip. Just the way she spoke was a reminder, a marked warning not to go against her, equal or not. Marillilla was lower. She used to make a stand in front of the class, and she would dig and dig for the answer she wanted until we stood there in front of everyone weeping with frustration. She pretended to sympathize, or perhaps she really did, but the more she patted us and told us not to cry, the worse it was. She'd not intended to say all that. It was Teslin's fault, always looking at her as if she were about to be upbraided for a spot on her dress. But she should understand. Marillilla had taught her, too. "You have remembered that all this time?" Stark incredulity painted Teslin's voice. "The sisters who did teach us did only do their duty. Sometimes I do think what Elida did say of you do be right." The annoying scritch resumed. "It simply came to mind when Marillilla began as if she were truly an ambassador, instead of a rebel." Jolene frowned at the garden. She despised every one of those women who had broken the White Tower and flaunted the break before all the world, them and anyone who aided them. But Elida had blundered too, horribly. The sisters who were rebels now could have been reconciled with a little effort. "What did she say of me? Teslin?" The sound of the pen continued, like fingernails scraping across a slate. Jolene went back inside. "What did Elida say?" Teslin laid another sheet atop her letter, either to blot or to shield it from Jolene's eyes, but she did not answer immediately. She scowled at Jolene, or perhaps just looked. It was difficult to say with her at times, and at last sighed. "Very well, if you must know. She did say you still do be a child." "A child?" Jolene's shock had no effect on the other woman. "Some," Teslin said calmly, "do change little from the day they do put on novice white. Some do change no at all. Elida does believe you have no grown up yet, and never will." Jolene tossed her head angrily, unwilling to let herself speak. To have that said by someone whose mother had been a child when she herself gained the shawl. Elida had been petted too much as a novice, made over too much for her strength and the remarkable speed of her learning. Jolene suspected that was why she was in such a fury about Elaine and Egwene and the wilder Nynaeve, because they were stronger than she, because they had spent far less time as novices, no matter that they had been pushed ahead too fast. Why, Nynaeve had never been a novice at all, and that was completely unheard of. "Since you did bring it up," Teslin went on, "perhaps we should try to take advantage of the situation." "What do you mean?" Embracing the true source, Jolene channeled air to lift the silver pitcher on the turquoise inlaid side table and fill a silver goblet with punch. As always, the joy of embracing Saidar thrilled her, soothing even as it exhilarated. "It do be obvious, I should think. Elida's orders do still stand. Elaine and Nynaeve are to be returned to the tower as soon as found. I did agree to wait, but perhaps we should wait no longer. A pity the Alvear girl does no be with them, but 2 will put us back in Elida's good graces. And if we can add the Cawthon boy, I do think those 3 will make her welcome us as if we did come with Althor himself. And this Avienda will make a fine novice, wilder or no. The goblet floated into Jolene's hand on air, and she reluctantly released the power. She had never lost the ardor she felt the first time she touched the source. Dew melon punch was a poor substitute for Saidar. The worst part of her penance before leaving the tower had been losing the right to touch Saidar. Almost the worst part. She had said it all herself, but Elida had made it clear that if she did not make it harsh, Elida would. She had no doubt the result would have been much worse then. Her good graces? Teslin, she humiliated us for no more reason than to show the others that she could. She sent us to this fly-ridden hole as far from everything important as she could, on the other side of the Arth Ocean, ambassadors to a queen with less power than a dozen of her own nobles, any one of whom could snatch the throne from her tomorrow if they could be bothered to. And you want to wheedle your way back into Elida's favor? If you do be the Amelin seat. Teslin touched the letter with the page lying atop it, moving the sheets a bit this way, then a bit that, as if framing her thoughts. Remaining silent for a time did let her know we are no lapdogs, but remaining silent too long could be seen as treason. Jolene sniffed. Ridiculous. When they're returned, they'll only be punished for running away, and now for pretending to be full sisters. Her mouth tightened. They were both guilty there, and those who allowed them to as well. But it made a sharp difference when one of them claimed her own Aja. By the time the green Aja finished with Elaine for that, it would be a very chastened young woman indeed who took the throne of Andor. Though it might be best if Elaine secures the Lion Throne first. Her training had to be completed either way. Jolene did not intend to see Elaine lost to the tower, whatever she had done. Do no forget joining with the rebels. Light, Teslin. They were probably scooped up just like the girls the rebels took out of the tower. Does it really matter a whit whether they begin mucking out stalls tomorrow or next year? That was surely as much as the novices and accepted with the rebels would have to face. Even the Ajas can wait to have them in hand, really. It is not as if they aren't safe. They are accepted, after all, and they certainly seem content to stay where we can reach them whenever we choose. I say, let us sit where Elida put us and continue to fold our hands and hold our tongues, until she asks nicely to find out what we are doing. She did not say that she was prepared to wait until Elida found herself deposed as Swan had been. The Hall surely would not put up with the bullying and bungling forever, but Teslin was red, after all, and would not appreciate hearing that. I suppose there do be no urgency, Teslin said slowly, the unspoken but all but shouting itself. Drawing a ball-footed chair to the table with another flow of air, Jolene settled herself to convincing her companion that silence remained the best policy. Still a child, was she? If she had her way, Elida would not get so much as a word out of Ebudar until she begged for it. The woman on the table arched up as far as her bonds would allow, eyes bulging, throat corded with a piercing scream that went on and on. Abruptly, the scream was a loud, choking rasp instead, and she convulsed, shaking from wrists to ankles, then collapsed in silence. Wide-open eyes stared sightlessly at the cobwebbed basement ceiling. Giving vent to curses was irrational, but Phalian could have turned the air as blue as any stableman. Not for the first time she wished she had Tamila here instead of Ispan. Questions were answered eagerly for Tamila, and nobody died until she was ready. Of course, Tamila enjoyed the work entirely too much, but that was beside the point. Channeling once more, Phalian gathered the woman's clothes from the filthy floor and dropped them atop the body. The red leather belt fell off, and she snatched it up by hand and slapped it back onto the pile. Perhaps she could use other methods. Scraps and pincers and hot irons were so messy. Leave the body in an alley somewhere. Slit the throat so it looks as if she was robbed. You can keep the coins in her purse. The two men, squatting on their heels against the stone wall, exchanged looks. Arnon and Nad might have been brothers by their appearance, all black hair and beady eyes and scars, with more muscles than any three men could need, but they did have sufficient brains to carry out simple orders, usually. "Forgiveness, mistress," Arnon said hesitantly, "but no one will believe." "Do as you're told," she snapped, channeling to haul him to his feet and slam him back against the stones. His head bounced, yet that surely could do him no danger. Nad rushed to the table, battling. "Yes, mistress, as you command, mistress." When she released Arnon, he did not battle, but he staggered over without any more objections to help gather up the body like so much rubbish and carry it out. Well, it was so much rubbish now. She regretted the outburst. Letting temper take control was irrational. It did seem to be effective at times, though. After all these years, that still surprised her. "Oh, Gideon, she will not like this," Ispan said as soon as the men had gone. The blue and green beads that were worked into her many slim black braids clacked as she shook her head. She had remained in the shadows the whole time, in a corner, with a small ward woven so she could not hear. Thalion managed not to glare. Ispan was the last companion she would have chosen for herself. She was blue, or had been. Perhaps she still was. Thalion did not really think herself any less white Aja because she had joined the black. Blues were too fervent, tying emotion around what should be viewed with utter dispassion. Rihanna, another white, would have been her choice, though the woman did have odd, unsound notions on several points of logic. "Mogideon has forgotten us, Ispan. Or have you received some private word from her? In any case, I am convinced this cache does not exist." "Mogideon, she says that it does," Ispan began firmly, but her voice quickly grew warm. "A store of Angreal and Sa'angreal and Turangreal. We will have some part of them. Angreal of our very own Thalion. Perhaps even Sa'angreal. She has promised." Mogideon was wrong. Thalion watched, shocked, widen the other woman's eyes. The chosen were only people. Learning that lesson had stunned Thalion too, but some refused to learn. The chosen were vastly stronger, infinitely more knowledgeable, and quite possibly they had already received the reward of immortality, but by all evidence they schemed and fought each other as hard as two Murambians with one blanket. Ispan's shock quickly gave way to anger. "There are others looking. Would they all look for nothing? There are friends of the dark looking. They must have been sent by others of the chosen. If the chosen look, can you still say there is nothing?" She would not see. If a thing could not be found, the most obvious reason was that it was not there. Thalion waited. Ispan was not stupid, only awestruck, and Thalion did believe in making people teach themselves what they should already be aware of. Lazy minds needed to be exercised. Ispan paced, swishing her skirts and frowning at the dust and old cobwebs. "This place smells, and it is filthy." She shuddered as a large black cockroach went skittering up the wall. The glow surrounded her for a moment. A flow squashed the beetle with a popping sound. Making a face, Ispan wiped her hands on her skirts as if she had used them instead of the power. She had a delicate stomach, though fortunately not when she could remove herself from the actual deed. "I will not report the failure to one of the chosen, Thalion. She would make us envy Leandrin, yes?" Thalion did not quite shiver. She did, however, cross the basement and pour herself a cup of plum punch. The plums had been old and the punch was too sweet, but her hands remained steady. Fear of Mogideon was perfectly sensible, but yielding to fear was not. Perhaps the woman was dead. Surely she would have summoned them by now, else, or snatched them sleeping into Tel Riod again to tell her why they had not yet carried out her commands. Until she saw a body, though, the only logical choice was to continue as if Mogideon would appear any moment. There is a way. How? Put every wise woman in Ebudar to the question. How many are there? 100? 200, perhaps? The sisters in the Tarasin Palace, they would notice this, I think. Forget your dreams of owning a Sa'angreal, Isabel. There is no long-hidden storehouse, no secret basement beneath the palace. Thalion spoke in cool, measured tones, perhaps more measured the more agitated Ispan became. She'd always enjoyed mesmerizing a class of novices with the sound of her voice. Almost all of the wise women are wilders, highly unlikely to know what we wish to learn. No wilder has ever been found keeping an Angreal, much less a Sa'angreal, and they surely would have been found. On the contrary, by every record, a wilder who discovers any object ties to the power rids herself of it as soon as possible for fear of attracting the wrath of the White Tower. Women who are put out of the tower, on the other hand, seem not to have the same fear. As you well know, when they are searched before leaving, fully 1 in 3 has secreted something about her person, an actual object of the power or something she believes is one. Of the few wise women who qualified at present, Callie was the perfect choice. When she was put out 4 years ago, she tried to steal a small Terangreal, a useless thing that makes images of flowers and the sound of a waterfall, but still an object tied to Sidon. And she tried to discover all the other novices' secrets, succeeding more often than not. If there was even a single Angreal in Ebudar, not to speak of a vast storehouse, do you think she could have been 4 years here without locating? I do wear the shawl, Thalion, Ispan said with extraordinary asperity, and I do know all of that as well as you. You said there was another way. What way? She simply would not apply her brain. What would please Moghedien as greatly as the cash? Ispan simply stared at her, tapping her. Nynaeve Almira, Ispan. Moghedien abandoned us to go chasing after her, but obviously she escaped somehow. If we give Nynaeve, and the Trakand girl for that matter, to Moghedien, she would forgive us 100 Sa'angreal, which clearly demonstrated that the Chosen could be irrational, of course. It was best, of course, to be extremely careful with those who were both irrational and more powerful than you. Ispan was not more powerful. Should have killed her as I wanted when she first appeared, she spat. Waving her hands, she stalked up and down, grime crunching loudly beneath her slippers. Yes, I know. Our sisters in the palace, they might have become suspicious. We do not wish to draw their eyes. But have you forgotten Tanjiko and Tyr? Where those 2 girls appear, disaster follows. I think if we cannot kill them, we should remain as far from Nynaeve Almira and Elaine Trakand as we can. As far as we can. Calm yourself, Ispan. Calm yourself. If anything, Thalion's soothing tone only seemed to agitate the other woman more. But Thalion was confident. Logic must prevail over emotion.
Sitting on an upended barrel in the sparse coolness of a narrow, shaded alley, he studied the house across the busy street. Suddenly he realized he was touching his head again. He did not have a headache, but his head felt peculiar sometimes. Most often when he thought of what he could not remember. 3 stories of white plaster, the house belonged to a goldsmith who supposedly was being visited by 2 friends she had met on a journey north some years ago. The friends had only been glimpsed on arrival and not seen since. Finding that out had been easy. Finding out there were Aes Sedai only a trifle more difficult. A lean young man in a torn vest, whistling his way down the street with no good on his mind, paused when he glimpsed him sitting on the barrel. His coat and his location in the shadows, and the rest of him, he admitted ruefully, probably looked tempting. He reached under his coat. His hands no longer possessed the strength or flexibility for sword work. The 2 long knives he had carried for well over 30 years had surprised more than one swordsman. Maybe something showed in his eyes, because the lean young man thought better of it and whistled his way on. Beside the house, the gate that led back to the goldsmith's stable swung open, and 2 burly men appeared, pushing a barrow piled high with soiled straw and muck. What were they up to? Arnon and Nab were hardly the last to be mucking up the stables. He would stay here until dark, he decided, then see whether he could find Cardin's pretty little killer again. Once again, he pulled his hand down from his head. Sooner or later, he would remember. He did not have much time left, but it was all he did have. He remembered that much. Chapter 18. As the Plow Breaks the Earth. Seizing Saidin long enough to unknot the ward he had woven across one corner of the anteroom, Rand raised his small silver-mounted cup and said, "More tea." Luz Theron muttered angrily in the back of his head. Carved chairs, heavy with gilt, stood in paired lines to either side of a golden rising sun, 2 paces wide, set into the polished stone floor, and another tall chair so gilded it seemed entirely gold, topped a small dais that was just as elaborate. But he sat cross-legged on a carpet, spread for the occasion, green and gold and blue, in a Tyran maze. The 3 clan chiefs seated across from him would have disliked him receiving them from the chair, even if they were offered their own. They were another maze to be trod on warily. He was in his shirt, sleeves pushed up his forearms to expose the red and gold dragon that curled around each, glittering metallically. The Aielman's Kadin sword covered theirs, on the left arm alone. Perhaps the reminder of who he was, that he too had been to Roidion when the journey meant death for most men who entered. Perhaps it was unnecessary. Perhaps. Those 3 faces gave away little as they watched Marana come from the corner where she had been sealed off. Janwen's creased face could have been carved from old wood, but it always looked that way, and if his blue-gray eyes seemed stormy, so did they always too. Even his hair looked like storm clouds. He was an even-tempered man, though. Indirian and one-eyed Mandalane might have been thinking of something else, except that their unblinking gazes followed her. Luz Theron suddenly went silent, as if he too watched through Rand's eyes. Marana's ageless features revealed even less than the clan chief's. Smoothing her pale gray skirts under, she knelt beside Rand and lifted the teapot. A massive ball of gold-washed silver, with leopards for feet and handle, and another crouched on the lid. It required both of her hands, and wavered a little as she carefully filled Rand's cup. Her manner seemed to say she did this because she wanted to, for reasons of her own that none of them could begin to understand. Her manner shouted Aes Sedai louder than her face did. Was that to the good or the bad? "I do not allow them to channel without permission," he said. The clan chiefs kept silent. Marana rose and moved to kneel beside each in turn. Mandalane covered his cup with a broad hand to indicate he wanted no more. The other 2 held out theirs, blue-gray eyes and green alike, studying her. What did they see? What more could he do? Replacing the heavy teapot on the thick leopard-handled tray, she remained on. "May I serve my Lord Dragon in any way else?" Her voice was self-possession itself, but after he motioned her back to a corner, after she had risen and turned, slim hands clutched at her skirts for an instant. Yet that might have been because, turning, they faced Ashiva and Narishima. The 2 Ashaman, to be precise, Narishima still only a soldier, the lowest level of Ashaman, with neither the sword nor the dragon on his collar. The Ashaman stood impassively between 2 of the tall, golden-framed mirrors that lined the walls. The younger man, thumbs tucked behind his sword belt, he ignored Marana, paid little more attention to Rand or the Aielman. Yet at a second glance, he saw that his dark, 2 big eyes were resting, as if he expected the unexpected to leap out of the air any moment. And who could say it was not? The Shiva appeared on his head of flies, his lips moved silently, and then front to the top. It was in a snarl that Ashaman. But it was Marana who occupied the dead man inside of his head. Only a fool kills a lion for a woman, in truth tamed. Irritably, Rand suppressed the voice to mute her thoughts. He was staring could break through, but not. Grabbing hold of Saidin, he rewove the ward that shut Marana away from their voices. Releasing the source again increased his irritation, the hissing in his head, the water drops on red coals. an echo pulsing in time with Luce Theron's mad, distant rage. Marana stood behind the barrier she could neither see nor feel, head high and Aes Sedai cheeks with cool eyes, light yellow. My sisters do not all realize how very much we need you, she had told them this morning in this very room. All of us who swore will do whatever you ask. That would not violate the three oaths. He had just wakened when she came with Zorlia escorting her. Neither seemed to care at all that he was still in a robe, with only one bite taken from his breakfast bread. I have more than a little skill in negotiation and mediation. My sisters have other skills. Let us serve you as we pledged. Let me serve you. We need you, but you have some need of us too. Ever present, a line in the corner of his brain. She was weeping again. He could not understand why she wept so often. He had forbidden her to come near him unless summoned, or leave her room without an escort of maidens. The sisters would sworn to him last night in the palace where he could keep an eye on him. But he had sensed tears from the moment she bonded him. Tears and a raw grief like claws. Sometimes it was less, sometimes more. Yet always there. Alana also had told him he needed his warm kisses, screamed it at him finally, her face red and tears rolling down her cheeks, before literally running from his presence. And she had spoken of serving too, though he doubted that Marana's present tasks were what either had in mind. Perhaps some sort of livery would make it clear? The clan chiefs watched Marana watch them, not so much as the flicker of an eyelash betrayed their thoughts. The wise ones have told you where the Aes Sedai stand, Rand said bluntly. Zorlia had told him they knew, but the fact would have been clear from the lack of surprise when they first saw Marana fetching courtesy. You've seen her bring the tray and pour your tea. You've seen her come and go as I say. If you want, I'll have her dance a jig. Convincing the Aiel that he was not on the end of an Aes Sedai leash was the most needed service any of the sisters could do right now. He would have them all doing jigs if necessary. Mandalane adjusted the gray-green patch over his right eye, the way he did when he wanted a moment to think. A thick, puckered scar ran up his forehead from behind the leather patch, halfway across his mostly bald head. When he finally spoke, it was only a little less blunt than Rand. Some say an Aes Sedai will do anything to have what she wants. Indirian lowered heavy white brows and peered down his long nose at his tea. Of only average height for an Aielman, he was shorter than Rand by half a hand, yet everything about him seemed long. The heat of the waist appeared to have melted away every spare ounce of flesh, and a few more besides. His cheekbones stood out sharp, and his eyes were emeralds set in caves. I do not like speaking of Aes Sedai. His deep, rich voice was always a shock coming from that gaunt face. What is done is done. Let the wise ones deal with them. Better to speak of the Shido dogs, Jenwyn said mildly, which was almost as great a shock coming from his fierce face. Within a few months, less than half a year at most, every Shido who can be will be dead or made Gaishan. Just because his voice was soft did not mean he was. The other two nodded. Mandalane smiled eagerly. They still seemed unconvinced. The Shido had been the professed reason for this meeting, and no less important for not being the most important. Not unimportant, the Shido had made trouble long enough, just not on the same page with the Aes Sedai in his book. They did present problems, though. 3 clans joining Timolin's Miagoma, already near Kinslayer's dagger, might well be able to do as Janwyn said, but there were those who could not be made Gaishan and could not be killed. Some were more critical than others. What of the wise ones? He asked. For a moment, their faces became unreadable. Not even Aes Sedai could do that so well as Aiel. Facing the one power did not frighten them, not where it showed at least. No one could outrun death, so Aiel believed. And 100 Aes Sedai in a rage could not make a lone Aiel lower the veil once raised. But learning that wise ones had taken part in the fighting at Dumai's Wells had hit them like watching the sun rise by night and the moon by day in a blood-red sky. Almost all of the wise ones will run with the guides to swine, Darian said at last, reluctantly. Sarinda was the wise one who had followed him from Red Springs, ran hold of the Kodara. Or perhaps followed was not the right word. Wise ones seldom did. In any case, most of the Kodara wise ones, the Shianda and the Darain, would go north with the spears. The Shadow wise ones will be dealt with by wise ones. His mouth twisted with disgust. All things change. Genwin's voice was even softer than usual. He believed, but he did not want to. Wise ones taking part in battle violated custom as old as the Aiel. Vandalane set his cup down with exaggerated care. Corofin wishes to see Jer again before the dream ends, and so do I. Like Vale and Ruark, he had 2 wives. The other chiefs had only 1 each, except Timlin. But a widowed chief seldom remained so long. The wise one saw to that if he did not. Will any of us ever see the sun rise again in the threefold land? I hope so, Rand said slowly. As the plow breaks the earth, shall he break the lives of men. And all that was shall be consumed in the fire of his eyes. The trumpets of war shall sound at his footsteps, the ravens feed at his voice, and he shall wear a crown of swords. The prophecies of the dragon gave little hope for anything except victory over the Dark One, and only a chance of that. The prophecy of Rodion, the Aiel prophecy, said he would destroy them. The bleakness swept through the clans because of him, and ancient customs were ripped apart. Even without the Aes Sedai, small wonder if some chiefs pondered whether they were right to follow Randolph Thor, dragons on his arms or no. I hope so. May you always find water and shade, Randolph Thor, Darian said. After they left, Rand sat frowning into his cup, finding no answers in the dark tea. Finally, he set it beside the tray and pushed his sleeves down. Marana's eyes were intent on him, as if trying to pull out his thoughts. There was a hint of impatience about her, too. He had told her to stay in the car and hear voices. Doubtless, she saw no reason why she should not come out. The clan chiefs were gone. Come out and dig out what had been said. Do you think they believe I dance on Aes Sedai strings? She said. Young Narishima gave a start. In truth, he was a little older than Rand, but he had the look of a boy 5 or 6 years younger. He glanced at Marana, as though she had the answer, and shifted his shoulders uncomfortably. I do not know, my Lord Dragon. The Shiva blinked and stopped murmuring to himself. Tilting his head, bird-like, he eyed Rand sideways. Does it matter, so long as they obey? It matters, Rand said. The Shiva shrugged, and Narishima frowned thoughtfully. Neither seemed to understand, yet maybe Narishima could come to. Maps littered the stone floor behind the throne on its dais, rolled or folded or spread out where he had left them. He shifted some with the toe of his boot. So much to be juggled at once. Northern Kyrian and the mountains called Kinslayer's Dagger, and the region around the city. Ilion and the plains of Moredo out to Farmating. The island of Tarvalin and all the surrounding towns and villages. Gildan and part of Amadisia. Movement and color in his head. Lews Therin moaned and laughed in the distance. Faint, mad mutters of killing the Ashaman, killing the Forsaken, killing himself. Alana stopped weeping, cutting anguish subdued beneath a thin thread of anger. Rand scrubbed his hands through his hair, pressing hard against his temples. What had it been like to be alone inside his own skull? He could not recall. One of the tall doors opened to admit one of the maidens who were standing guard in the corridor. Rylan, with vivid yellow-red hair and a grin for everything, actually managed to appear plump. For a maiden, anyway. Verlaine Serpentrak and Nora Larson wish to see the Karakar, she announced. Her voice went from warm and friendly on the first name to cold and flat on the second, without disturbing her grin. Rand sighed and opened his mouth to let them enter, but Verlaine did not wait. She stormed in, a somewhat calmer Nora at her heels. The Aes Sedai shied slightly at the sight of Toshiba and Narishima, and stared curiously when she saw Mirana standing in her corner. Not so Verlaine. "What is the meaning of this, my Lord Dragon?" she demanded, brandishing the letter he had delivered to her this morning. She stalked across the floor to shake it under his nose. "Why am I to return to Mayenne? I have governed well here in your name, and you know it. I could not stop Colover having herself crowned, but at least I stopped her changing the laws you made. Why am I to be sent away? And why am I told by letter, not to my face? By letter! Thanked for my services and dismissed like a clerk who's done collecting the taxes." Even furious, the First of Mayenne was one of the most beautiful women Rand had ever seen. Black hair fell in shining waves to her shoulders, framing a face to make a blind man stare. A man could easily drown in her dark eyes. Today she wore shimmering silver silk, thin and clinging, more suited to entertaining a lover in private. In fact, had the neckline been a hair lower, she would not have been able to wear the dress in public. As it was, he was not sure she should. He had told himself, when writing that letter, that it was because he had too much to do and no time for arguing with her. The truth was, he enjoyed looking at her too much. For some reason, he had begun feeling that that was not exactly wrong, but almost. As soon as she appeared, Luce Theron gave over ranting to hum softly, the way he did when admiring a woman. Abruptly, Rand realized he was thumbing his earlobe and felt a shock. Instinctively, he knew that was something else Luce Theron did without thinking, like the humming. He pushed his hand to his side, but for an instant it wanted to rise to his ear again. "Burn you, this is my body." The thought was a snarl. "Mine!" Luce Theron's hum stopped in surprise and confusion. Without a sound, the dead man fled, back into the deepest shadows of Rand's brain. Rand's silence had an effect. Verlaine lowered the letter, and her anger receded. A little. Eyes fixed on his, she drew a deep breath that heated his cheeks. "My Lord Dragon." "You know why," he cut in. Looking only at her eyes was not easy. Oddly, he found himself wishing Min were there. Very odd. Her viewings would be no help now. "When you returned from that sea folk ship this morning, there was a fellow waiting on the dock with a knife." Verlaine tossed her head contemptuously. "He came no closer than 3 steps. I was accompanied by a dozen of the winged guards and Lord Captain Galien. Nirella had led some of the winged guards to Demise Wells, but Galien commanded the guards as a whole. She had 800 of them in the city, aside from those who returned with Nirella. You expect me to turn tail because of a cut purse? Don't play the fool, he growled. A cut purse with a dozen soldiers around you? Color flared in her cheeks. She knew all right. He gave her no chance for protests or explanations or any other foolishness. Dobrain tells me he's already heard whispers in the palace that you betrayed Colover. Those who supported her might be afraid to say boo to me, but they'll pay to have a knife stuck into you. And Fail, too, according to Dobrain. That was being taken care of. But they won't have a chance because you are going back to Mayenne. Dobrain will take your place here until Elaine claims the Sun Throne. She spluttered as if he had dumped cold water down her dress. Her eyes grew dangerously large. He had been glad when she stopped being afraid of him, but now he was not so sure. As she opened her mouth to explode, Anura touched her arm, and her head whipped around. They exchanged a long look, and Verlaine's sputters subsided. She smoothed her skirts, vigorously squared her shoulders. Rand looked away hastily. Marana hovered at the edge of the ward. He wondered whether she had stepped across and dodged back. How else could she stand right on top of what she could not possibly detect? When his head turned, she moved backward until she almost touched the walls, her eyes never leaving him. By her face, she would have poured his tea every day for 10 years to hear what was being said.
My Lord Dragon,
Verlaine said, smiling.
there is still the matter of the Afon Mier.
Her voice was warm honey. The curve of her lips would have sparked thoughts of kisses in a stone.
The way Mistress Harine is not pleased to be left sitting on a ship so long. I have visited with her a number of times. I can smooth the difficulties there, which I hardly think Lord Dobrain can. I believe the sea folk are vital to you, whether or not the prophecies of the dragon mention them. You are crucial in their prophecies, though they seem reluctant to say exactly how.
Rand stared. Why was she struggling so hard to keep a difficult job that had offered few thanks from Carrie even before some began wanting to kill her? She was a ruler, used to dealing with rulers and embassies, and street thugs and knives in the dark. Warm honey or no warm honey, it was not for any desire to stay near Randall Thor. She had, well, offered herself to him once. But the hard fact was that Mayenne was a small country, and Verlaine used her beauty as a man would a sword to keep her land from being swallowed by its more powerful neighbor, Tyr. And there, simple as that, he had it. Verlaine, I don't know what else I can do to guarantee Mayenne for you, but I will write out any... Colors swirled so strongly in his head that his tongue froze. Luce Theron cackled. A woman who knows the danger and isn't afraid is a treasure only a madman would spurn. Guarantees. Bleakness engulfed honey, and anger bubbled again, cold this time. Anura plucked at Verlaine's sleeve, but she paid the Aes Sedai no heed. While I sit in Mayenne with your guarantees, others will serve you. They will ask their rewards, and the service I did here will be faded and old, while theirs is bright and new. If the High Lord Wyraman gives you Ilion and asks Mayenne in return, what will you say? If he gives you Murindy and Altara and everything clear to the Arth Ocean, will you serve if it still means leaving? He asked quietly. You will be out of my sight, but not out of my mind. Luce Theron laughed again, in such a way that Rand nearly blushed. He enjoyed looking. Sometimes the things Luce Theron thought. Verlaine considered him with stubborn eyes, and he could all but see the questions being toted up behind the North.
Hey, Bastion, how you doing, bro?
Which to ask. The door opened.
Since you're here, let's do it, Dad. Have some wedding pie.
A strikingly handsome woman swept in right behind her, iron gray hair gathered in a bun atop her head and decorated with dangling gold ornaments. And it seemed everything happened at once.
Use my brother's nectar collector.
Marana darted through the ward.
Still haven't got around to getting the cash for mine,
No,
or
Ketsun.
to replace mine.
You mustn't harm him. You must not.
Rand's skin tickled and embraced side down. Perhaps more than one. Swiftly moving well clear of Verlaine, he seized hold of the source, flooding himself with Sayadine, feeling it fill the ocean. Bathsheba's face twitched as he glowed from one Aes Sedai to another. Despite the power he held, Narishima grasped his sword hilt with both hands, assumed the stance called leopard in the tree, and the brink of drawing. Luce then snarled at killing and death. Kill them all. Kill them now. Violet raised her veil, shouting something, and suddenly a dozen maidens were in the room, veiling, spears ready. It was hardly surprising that Verlaine stood gaping as if everyone had gone mad. For someone who had caused all that, his stab swing seemed remarkably unaffected. He looked at the maidens and shook her head. Decent roses said dryly.
But it is not quite the grave. Oh, do calm down, Miranda, before you frighten someone. One would think you would have grown a little less excitable since putting off novice wife.
Miranda opened and closed her mouth, looking back. Tingling back. Rand did not release Sayadin, though, nor did the Ashima. Who are you? He demanded. What Aja? Read by Miranda's reaction, but for a Red sister simply to walk in like this, alone, would require suicidal courage. What do you want? Cadsuane's gaze lingered on him for no more than a moment, and she did not answer. Miranda's lips parted. The gray-haired woman looked at her, raising one eyebrow, and that was that. Miranda actually reddened and lowered her eyes. Anura was still staring at the newcomer, as if at a ghost, or a giant. Without a word, Cadsuane swept across the room to the two Ashaman, dark green divided
Hey,
space.
Warlord of Art, how you doing?
Rand was beginning to get the feeling that she always moved in that rushing glide, wasting no time, and allowing nothing to impede her. The Shiva stared her up and down and sneered. Although looking him straight in the face, she did not seem to notice, any more than she appeared to notice Narishima's hands on his sword when she put a finger under his chin, moving his head from side to side before he could jerk back.
What lovely eyes, she murmured.
Narishima blinked uncertainly, and Shiva's sneer turned to a grin, but a nasty one that made his former smirk lighthearted in comparison. Do nothing, Rand snapped. The Shiva had the gall to glower at him before solemnly pressing a fist to his chest in the salute the Ashaman used. What do you want here, Cadsuane? Rand went on. Look at me, burn you!
Hell yeah, cheers, bro.
Turning gesture.
Hell yeah, that's good. Always good when everyone's doing good.
A dragon reborn. I'd have thought even a child like Moraine could have taught you a few manners. Rylan put the spear from her right hand with those clutched behind her buckler, and flashed maiden hand talk. For once, none laughed. For once, Rand was sure the talk was not a joke about him. Be easy, Rylan, he said, raising a hand. All of you be easy. Cadsuane ignored the biplate, too, directing a smile to Berlane.
So this is your Berlane.
She is more beautiful than I had heard. The curtsy she made, bowing her head, was quite deep, yet somehow without any suggestion of obeisance. No hint that she was in any way less. It truly was a curtsy, no more. My lady first of Mayenne, I must speak with this young man, and I would retain your advisor. I've taken many duties here. I would not keep you from them. It was as clear a dismissal as could be, short of holding the door open. Berlane inclined her head graciously, then smoothly turned to Rand and spread her skirts in a curtsy so deep that he worried whether she would remain even as clothed as she was.
My Lord Dragon,
She intoned.
I ask your kind permission to withdraw.
Rand's return bow was not so practiced. Granted, my lady first, as you wish. He offered her a hand to help her rise. I hope you will consider my proposal.
My Lord Dragon, I will serve you wherever and however you desire.
Her voice was all honey again.
Well, let's do another dab,
That's what he benefits, he supposed.
just cuz.
There was certainly no flirtation on her voice, only determination. She answered. When the door closed behind Berlane, Cadsuane said,
It's always good to see children play. Don't you think, Miranda?
Verona goggled, head swiveling between Rand and the gray-haired sister. Anura looked as though only willpower held her upright. Most of the maidens
yeah.
followed Berlane.
Definitely appreciate people drop the like.
Rylan and two others remained before the door, still veiled. It might have been coincidence that they
Do another dab.
The Shiva also seemed to think any danger passed. He leaned back against the wall with a
Some
quick
wedding
bow,
pie.
moving silently.
See if we can get a better look at it with the lid on the back of it.
Narishima frowned questioningly at Rand, but Rand only shook his head. exerting himself. Luce there muttered the same thing. Why? Stepping onto the dais, Rand took up the dragon scepter from the throne and sat, waiting to see what would happen. The woman was not. Aside from all the other clothes, a lot of bands of it running around the wall from the face, for instance, the nearly 2 feet of frozen skin. I never known but why are they using to go down and blush? Isn't it too short? Rand scooped up the tray and stuck it through the metal filter. Mirana had brought extra cups. 4 still stood unused on the tray. He filled 3, replaced the teapot, and waited. It floated in midair, supported by Saidin. 3 very different women in appearance, 3 distinctly different reactions. Anura looked at the tray, much as one might a coiled viper. Gave a tiny shake of her head, a small step back. Nothing could tell her
That
which
was
of
a
the
good
3
one.
men had poured the tea. Then she looked across her frustrated Rand, lounging with one leg over the opposite chair. That's a good boy, she said. The maidens asked shocked looks above their heads. For whatever reason, that was what she wanted, and she would not. I will ask one more time, he said. Strange that his mind had been full. Instead, he was thinking of how to disguise a answer or leave. By the door or a window. Your choice. Again, Mirana began to speak, and again Katsui silenced her, this time with a sharp gesture for having been waiting. To see you? I am not right, but I have worn the shawl longer than any other sister living, and I have faced more men who could channel than any 4 than any 10. Not that I hunted them, understand, but I seem to have a nose. Calmly, a woman saying she had been to market once or twice in life. Some fought to the bitter end, kicking and screaming after they were shielded and bound. Some wept and begged, offering gold, anything, their very souls not to be taken. Still others meek as lambs, thankful finally to be done with. Life's truth they all need at the end. There is nothing left for them but tears and death. The heat inside him erupted in a rage. Tray and massive teapot hurtled across the room, smashing a mirror with a thunderous crash and bouncing back in a shower of glass. Half-flattened pot spraying tea. Tray spinning across the floor, bent double. Everyone jumped except Katsui. Rand leaped from the dais, clutching the dragon scepter so hard his knuckles hurt. Is that supposed to frighten me? He growled. Do you expect me to beg, or to be thankful, to weep? I said I could close my hand and crush you. The hand he held up shook with fury. Mirana knows why I should. The light only knows why I don't. The woman looked at the battered tea things as if she had all the time in the world. Now you know, she said at last, calm as ever, that I know your future and your present. The light's mercy fades to nothing for a man who can channel. Some see that and believe the light denies those men. I do not. Have you begun to hear voices yet? What do you mean? He asked slowly. He could feel Luce there listening. The tingle returned to his skin, and he very nearly channeled, but all that happened was that the tea floated to Katsui, turning slowly in the air for her to examine. Some men who can channel begin to hear voices. She spoke almost absently, frowning at the flattened sphere of
And that's
silver
why I'm a
below.
little distracted, everyone.
It is a part of the madness. Voices conversing with them, telling them what to do.
The teapot drifted gently to the floor by her feet.
Have you heard any?
Startlingly, Deshiva gave a raucous laugh, shoulders shaking. Narishima wet his lips. He might not have been afraid of the woman before, but now he watched her closely as a scorpion. I will ask the questions, Rand said firmly. You seem to forget. I am the Dragon Reborn. You are real, aren't you? He wondered. There was no answer. Lews Therin? Sometimes the man did not answer, but Aes Sedai always drew him. Lews Therin? He was not mad. The voice was real, not imagination. Not madness. A sudden desire to laugh did not help. Cadsuane sighed.
You are a young man who has little idea where he is going or why or what lies ahead. You seem overwrought. Perhaps we can speak when you are more objection to my taking Mirana and Anora away for a little while. I've seen neither in quite some time.
Rand gaped at her. She swooped in, insulted him, threatened him, casually announced she knew about the voice in his head, and with that she wanted to leave and talk with Mirana and Anora. Is she mad? Still no answer from Lews Therin. The man was real. He was. Go away, he said. Go away and... He was not mad. All of you, get out! Get out! Deshiva blinked at him, tilting his head, then shrugged and started for the door. Cadsuane smiled in such a way that he half expected her to tell him again he was a good boy, then gathered up Mirana and Anora and herded them toward the maidens, who were lowering their veils and frowning worriedly. Narishima looked at him too, hesitating until Rand gestured sharply. Finally, they were all gone, and he was alone. Alone. Convulsively, he hurled the dragon scepter. The spear point stuck quivering in the back of one of the chairs, the tassels swaying. I am not mad, he said to the empty room. Lews Therin had told him things. He would never have escaped Galena's chest without the dead man's voice. But he had used the power before he ever heard the voice. He had figured out how to call lightning and hurl fire and form a construct that had killed hundreds of Trollocs. But then, maybe that had been Lews Therin, like those memories of climbing trees in a plum orchard, and entering the hall of the servants, and a dozen more that crept up on him unawares. And maybe those memories were all fancies, mad dreams of a mad mind, just like the voice. He realized he was pacing and could not stop. He felt as if he had to move, or his muscles would tear him apart in spasms. I am not mad, he panted. Not yet. I am not. The sound of the door opening made him whirl, hoping for men. It was Rylan again, supporting a short, stocky woman in a dark blue dress, with hair more gray than not and a blunt face. A haggard, red-eyed face. He wanted to tell them to go away, to leave him alone. Alone. Was he alone? Was Lews Therin a dream? If only they would leave him. Adrian Tarson was the head of the school he had founded here in Cairhien. A woman so practical, he was not sure she believed in the one power, since she could neither see nor touch it. What could reduce her to this state? He made himself turn toward her. Mad or not, alone or not, there was no one else to do what had to be done. Not even this small duty, heavier than a mountain. What is the matter? He asked, making his voice as gentle as he could. Suddenly weeping, Adrian stumbled to him and collapsed against his chest. When she was coherent enough to tell her story, he felt like weeping too.
Chapter 19. Diamonds and Stars. Mirana followed closely as she dared on Cadsuane's heels, 100 questions bubbling on her tongue. But Cadsuane was not a woman whose sleeve you plucked. She decided who she noticed and when. Anora held her silence too, the pair of them drawn along in the other's wake, down the palace corridors, down flights of stairs, polished marble at first, then plain dark stone. Marana exchanged glances with her sister Grey and felt a moment's pang. She did not know the woman really, but Honora wore the steely look of a girl on her way to the mistress of novices, determined to be brave. They were not novices. They were not children. She opened her mouth and closed it, intimidated by the gray bun bobbing ahead of her, with its dangling moons and stars and birds and fish. Cadsuane was Cadsuane. Marana had met her once before, or at least listened to her and been spoken to when she was a novice. Sisters had come from every Aja to see the woman, filled with an awe they could not hide. Once Cadsuane Melaidrin had been the standard by which every new entry into the novice books was judged. Until Elaine Trakand, none had come to the White Tower in her lifetime who could match that standard, much less surpass it. In more ways than one, her like had not walked among Aes Sedai for 1,000 years. A refusal to accept selection as a sitter was unheard of, yet it was said she had refused, and at least twice. It was said she had spurned being raised head of the Green Aja, too. It was said she once vanished from the tower for 10 years because the hall intended to raise her Amyrlin. Not that she had ever spent a day more in Tar Valon than absolutely necessary. Word of Cadsuane came to the tower, stories to make sisters gape, adventures to make those who dreamed of the shawl shiver. She would end a legend among Aes Sedai, if she was not already. The shawl had graced Marana's shoulders for over 25 years when Cadsuane announced her retirement from the world, her hair already solid, and everyone assumed her long dead when the Aiel War erupted another 25 years on. But before the fighting was 3 months old, she reappeared, accompanied by 2 warders, men long in the tooth.
All right, everyone. I'm going to call Into This Light for tonight. I want to thank all y'all that keep showing up and stopping by and showing me support. I definitely appreciate all y'all. Until next time, everyone. All y'all stay safe out there.